They're attacking the energy shield, Alex told Olivia. What should we do? Although he was also one of the Alliance's 5 deputy leaders, he knew that his position was lower than Olivia's, and his tactical abilities were far inferior to hers. When it came to the hierarchy of the Alliance, no one wasted time bickering about power. More power came with an increased number of responsibilities, and Alex didn't want to be responsible for serious decisions because he feared what Charles might do to him if he got things wrong. Another honorary deputy of the Alliance had chosen to withdraw for the same reason. Not only is Charles not here, Olivia said, but he also took the 2 level 5 paranormals with him. We can't possibly defeat these guys on our own. Maybe we can allow them to attack the energy shield and then pressure them gradually by using a sustained attack? Taylor suggested. We don't have nearly as many paranormals as they do, she replied. A battle of attrition isn't a good play for us. The Dawn Alliance had the fewest number of paranormals out of all the major powers. This wasn't because they couldn't attain powerful paranormals, but because they had accepted too many ordinary people into their ranks. Most of the other groups looked down on the Alliance for that reason, even though many of the ordinary Alliance members had the ability to cultivate and become martial artists. Nevertheless, there was the general feeling among the typically very elitist paranormals that ordinary troops were of little use other than as decoys or cannon fodder during a battle. Other groups had a paranormal to ordinary person rate of 1 in 10, and the Dawn Alliance was the only group that had a ratio of 1 to 100. Charles's reason for this was because he wanted to allow every warrior to play their role. Every person who pursued advancement within the Alliance could rely on their own strength to sustain themselves, and that was the reason the group attracted so many people. Don't you think it's odd that Charles would take away 2 level 5 paranormals? Olivia asked. It's certainly not because he thought we were immune to attacks here. Taylor suddenly understood. Maybe it's because the enemy's real target isn't here, he said. Olivia nodded. That's right. And if their real target isn't here, I think there may be an element of smoke and mirrors going on. They'll make a lot of noise, and they'll surround us, but they aren't going to treat this place like a proper battlefield. It's an ambush, Alex exclaimed. They're just waiting for the right moment to strike. The other Alliance leaders exchanged looks and thought that it was a likely scenario. They knew that if they could launch a surprise attack, they could put an end to the battle quickly with minimal losses, but failure would result in catastrophe. Don't let your guard down, Olivia said. Things are about to get ugly. Charles and Alice arrived at the location where they had arranged for the reinforcements to stay. Because the Dawn Alliance was ready to expand to more than 100,000 people, Charles and the others had already built many buildings in advance so that they could house the new members. When Olivia had surveyed the amount of new people looking to join the Alliance before starting the building project, she had discovered they had needed significantly more housing to accommodate everyone. So she had overseen the development of several additional houses. They had built more than enough houses to accommodate all the existing members, and they still had many empty houses available. So when the reinforcements arrived, they already had a place to live too. Every facet of the houses, including dining, bathrooms, and other facilities, was in perfect condition. Once Charles had arranged for shelter for the reinforcements, Olivia had sent people to solve the food supply issue so that the newcomers would have hot meals to eat. By doing this, she alleviated some of the pressure on Charles. Some people hadn't been impressed with his lack of care for their well-being, but Charles hadn't left them entirely unprotected. He had arranged some people to guard the entrance while he and the others were away. Because his forces were scattered to begin with, no one would notice if a few of them disappeared for a while. When Charles and the others arrived, they noticed several suspicious figures approaching the energy shield's defensive nodes. The shield was similar to a force field. Although it circulated energy, it also consumed it for power in a cyclical exchange. The energy node was able to absorb the soul energy from the Earth and the air to replenish its own consumption. If it wasn't self-sustaining, it would have the ability to drain a level 5 monster within an hour due to the speed at which it consumed energy. Zack had seen the suspicious people moving toward the shield, but before he could make a move to stop them, Charles tapped him on the shoulder and shook his head. "Why'd you stop me?" Zack asked quietly. "Have you forgotten what I said earlier today?" Charles asked. Zack held his tongue. He remembered the plan Charles had made during the day, and he knew it was time to implement it. Charles patted his shoulder in a comforting way. "I know you can't bear to see casualties," he said, "but I want you to keep asking yourself one question. If the commotion here affects our front line, what'll happen?" "I understand," Zack said softly. "No war comes without sacrifices." If we have the strength, we may be able to avoid a lot of casualties. But we have to try and minimize the losses of our own people. To be kind to others is to be cruel to ourselves. Charles was glad he didn't have to try and convince Zack. It seemed that Miranda had already explained things to him. Charles thought it was better that way, since Miranda and Zack had similar outlooks on life, and she would have explained the situation far gentler than he ever could. Charles drew a hexagram on the ground and said, "When I established the energy shield, I'd already considered this situation. No matter how impenetrable the fortress seems, if an opening is made and the enemy breaks through, the inside is left vulnerable. So I designed a 6-point formation to rectify the weaknesses." "Can that formation defend the base from enemies that get inside?" Alice asked. Charles pointed at the 6 corners of the shape and said, "We'll label the doors at each corner with 1 element each. This seems like it would create 1 hexagonal protective shield that connects the 6 doors. But in reality, it doesn't work quite like that." Zack's eyes lit up. "So do you mean that the 6 doors can be combined to form a line of defense?" "That's right," Charles said. "They all form protection for the Door of Light. Our main area of protection is the Door of Light, but when we connect the diagonal line between the doors of Earth and Wind, it forms a defensive wall. Then we connect the doors of Water and Fire, and that creates another wall." Zack whistled in amazement. "In other words," he said, "even if the enemy comes in through one of the doors, they still have to go through 2 walls before they can reach the area behind the Door of Light." The design structure blew his mind. It was already difficult for anyone to breach the fortress, but even if they did, there was an even stronger line of defense waiting for them inside. "Our most important task right now," Charles said, "is to establish the connections between these 2 diagonal lines." He indicated to them on the diagram of the defensive walls he had drawn on the ground. Zack thought for a moment. "All right," he said finally. He knew what the result would be, and he didn't approve of it, but he had no choice but to go along with the plan. If he didn't, the Dawn Alliance would suffer the consequences. Alice, on the other hand, had grown accustomed to Charles's style. She knew that no matter how ruthless he was, he wouldn't deliberately let the reinforcement group come to harm. In fact, she was willing to bet that he was doing everything he could to minimize casualties. She and Zack followed Charles, and they put up the energy shield together. What Charles had failed to tell them was that the formation could be expanded further. Aside from the 2 defensive connections he had mentioned, it was possible to create more walls by using nodes of concentrated energy within the array. Within the walls connecting the hexagram's doors, nodes would appear and create even more connected defensive lines of energy between them, blocking the enemy's attacks to the strongest possible extent. Due to time limitations, Charles hadn't been able to strengthen the defensive array any further on his own, so he had asked the others for help. Once the 3 of them had successfully managed to put up the shield, they sat down and prepared for a long wait. After about an hour and a half, a few figures began to approach them. "This isn't good," Charles muttered. "They're going to discover the new energy shield." He then said to Zack, "I want you to shout, 'Someone is destroying the energy node and trying to let everyone in.'" He would have done it himself, but he knew that too many people were familiar with his voice. Without hesitation, Zack repeated Charles's requested phrase. He was surprised that when he shouted, his voice was mysteriously amplified. Charles had used his control over the wind to create a type of megaphone. Zack's voice boomed loudly, and it was impossible to tell where his voice had come from. Charles had read in his ancient book that the Extract Amulet's abilities were all-encompassing. Every element's ability had been recorded thoroughly in it. Despite their destructive capabilities, Charles also saw them as more than just effective combat techniques. To him, they also represented the keys to a new world. They were like a treasure map to something undiscovered, and he was desperate to uncover their secrets. Extract amulets were the foundation to understanding the essence of soul energy, and using them creatively was the path to overall improvement. Although the strangers had heard Zack loud and clear, they were unable to locate the source of his voice. Once Zack had shouted at the people, he and Charles scuttled away from their hiding place to a new location. Although Charles was fairly certain that the strangers wouldn't locate them, he didn't want to risk it in case there were any wind-powered paranormals in their midst who could blow their cover. Zack's shout sent the entire camp into panic. "What's going on? Who wants to destroy the gate?" "It must be a false alarm." "I don't believe it. Let's go and look." No one knew whether to believe the unknown person's cries or not. However, on the chance that what he had said was true, Their first instinct was to examine the energy node. The paranormals relied heavily on the nodes for support, as their powers required a base level of soul energy to use. It was therefore paramount that the nodes were protected at all costs. Not only had Zack sent all the Dawn Alliance's reinforcements into a panic, but even the members of Stellar Technology who were hiding in the crowd had succumbed to the state of confusion. Although the appointed time for their attack was rapidly approaching, it hadn't arrived yet, and so they still hadn't made a move. But when someone blew the whistle, the spies knew they had to act quickly. They looked at each other and all silently agreed to enact the plan. Once they had decided to act, they understood the importance of destroying the energy node. They all knew that if they didn't take advantage of the opportunity to attack, it was likely that they wouldn't get another chance to do so. One of them quickly stabbed a martial artist who had been guarding the energy node. There was an instant outcry by the other guards who had witnessed the act. "What are you guys doing? Stop those traitors!" The people in charge of protecting the energy nodes then saw the significant number of people approaching them and prepared for a fight. But before they could resist, they were quickly bested by the Stellar Technology spies. The spies set to work trying to destroy the formation that was flickering with its signature 5-colored light. Although the energy shield's overall defense was strong, the individual energy nodes were fragile. In a matter of minutes, the first energy node had been completely destroyed. The rest of the spies attacked the other points. They made short work of them, and soon all the energy nodes had been damaged beyond repair. In no time, all 12 nodes surrounding the secret door had been deactivated. But the actions of the invaders had attracted several witnesses who screamed at them. "What are you guys doing? Are you crazy?" The reinforcements' minds were spinning. They hadn't expected anyone to destroy the energy nodes. But despite their frantic cries, the Stellar Technology spies didn't stop. One of them set off a few flares. The rockets blasted up into the night sky, and instantly all the witnesses, no matter how dim, realized what was happening. Stellar Technology had infiltrated their ranks. "We're taking over," one of the invaders shouted. "Surrender now! It's your only way out!" But the infiltrators had barely begun threatening the reinforcements when a torrential rainstorm erupted over their heads. They were all doused in water and left soaking wet. "What is this?" one of them cried. "Fight back," his friend replied. The infiltrators were shocked by the sudden onslaught of water, and someone in the reinforcement crowd cried out from the back, "Kill these traitors!" With a resounding roar, the reinforcement group became incensed with anger. "We're all here to join the Dawn Alliance," one of the members said. "You bastards snuck into our ranks and destroyed the energy shield. You're all treacherous little snakes." The Stellar Technology spies knew they couldn't win against the throng of people. They went to retreat, but as they tried to escape, they found that their way was barred by an ice wall. The realization hit them hard. Because someone had blown their cover, they had been forced to act before they were ready. Their lack of preparation meant that they were far less coordinated than they had planned. They had been counting on forcing or coercing the others to join them, but it seemed like that wasn't going to happen. Their improvisations had resulted in their plan falling apart, and they knew there was no chance they could win over the crowd now. Their well-orchestrated attack had failed, and the furious reinforcement team began to close in on them. The team quickly rounded up all the spies, and the ice wall ensured that none of them were able to escape. When the Dawn Alliance's reinforcement group had finished dealing with the Stellar Technology spies that had infiltrated their ranks, they heard gunfire from outside the wall. "Everyone inside, listen up," a person using a loudspeaker called. "We've got you surrounded. You have one choice, and that's to surrender to us." When they heard the shouting, the reinforcement team all exchanged nervous looks. "What should we do?" someone asked. "I don't know," replied another. "Do we fight them?" They've obviously planned this. The sudden explosion of a cannon sent a ripple of fear through the group. Many of them didn't know what to do. It was late at night, and they didn't know how many enemies were waiting for them beyond the wall. As they discussed what to do, someone grabbed a knife and stabbed the person beside him. The victim screamed. "What happened?" someone cried. "Why did you do that?" The action sparked a fight among the crowd, and chaos descended among them. "Long live Stellar Technology!" someone shouted. Many began to wonder whether the coup had been successful, and others tried to flee for their lives. Then someone had an idea. "Let's head for the Dawn Alliance," they shouted. "They'll be able to help." When the others heard this, they decided it was the best course of action. They had no idea whether the Alliance would be happy about it, but they had to try. So all of them ran in the direction of the door of light that protected the Alliance, followed closely by the Stellar Technology troops. However, they could only get so far before they encountered another invisible wall. "Why is there an energy shield here?" a person at the front asked. "It wasn't here during the day," someone complained. "Charles must have made it," another cried. "He can't be that cruel." Many of them felt betrayed. They began to feel strong indignation toward Charles. They hadn't expected him to put up a shield between them and the Alliance. He had evidently decided that it was safer to keep them all out. There was an immediate backlash, and public opinion turned on Charles. "That bastard must have known this would happen," a man yelled. "He thought he'd lock us up here and let us fight Stellar Technology for him. Charles is a prick! Screw that guy. We should teach him a lesson." The man who had initiated the change in opinion addressed the crowd. "Since Charles has decided to abandon us," he said, "there's only one way out." "Are you saying that your only way out is to surrender to Stellar Technology?" a familiar voice asked sternly. When the rebel located the source of the voice, he was petrified. "Why is Charles here?" he thought. His mind went blank. He had thought that since Charles had built an energy shield there, he must have locked them all in. He hadn't been prepared to see Charles standing among them. The man was about to try and defend himself when he felt his body lock up. He was unable to move or speak. One of the crowd members asked Charles timidly, "What's going on?" "That's right," someone cried. "You owe us all an explanation." But before they could accost him, Charles shouted, "You want an explanation? I think you're the ones who ought to be explaining yourselves to me." Everyone was intimidated by him, and they shrunk back in fear. "I asked you all to guard this door," Charles said, "and you all ran away at the first sign of danger." None of them had expected him to show up and hold them all accountable for their actions. Moreover, Charles's aura of menace and booming voice were terrifying. They were all so frightened that they didn't know how to react. "This is all because those Stellar people had spies among us," one of the paranormal said. Charles sneered, and he approached the person who had dared to speak. "The energy node is one of our most important resources," Charles said. "How could you all let yourselves go to pieces just because there were a few traitors among you?" He glared at the paranormal, and then he turned his attention to the man who had tried to turn everyone against him. "These people from Stellar Technology killed your friends and your comrades," he said. "But you thought it was a good idea to encourage everyone to join them." He wielded his right hand like a sword and made a slashing movement through the air. There was a flash of light, and the man's lifeless body fell to the ground. "Stellar Technology is a force established by a group of miscreants and barbarians," Charles told the surrounding crowd. "They stroll among us, capture our friends, and use people we love as test subjects. What do you think we should do to them?" "Kill them!" someone shouted instinctively. "That's right," Charles replied. "If you had seen the horrors I have, you wouldn't think twice about killing them. They transform our friends into cyborg beasts. They drive us apart and spread fear among us. I'll never compromise with scum like them. Anyone who tries to invade our base will be dealt with accordingly." He turned to address Alice and Zach. "I'll lead the charge on these invaders," he said. "You guys follow me." He shouted to everyone else. "I don't know if you've all forgotten your identity as fighters, but if you guys want to roll over and submit to these dogs from Stellar Technology, be my guest. But you'll be treated the same as all the rest of them. Zach, follow me." Charles and his companions sent a fiery meteor streaking across the sky. It flew at the Stellar Technology troops and crashed among them with a terrific explosion. Then Charles brandished the Sword of Death in his hand and dashed towards Stellar Technology's formation. The spot where he made contact was illuminated by a half-moon-shaped sword energy, and a dozen figures fell to the ground. When the reinforcement group saw Charles personally leading the charge, their hearts beat faster, and their blood felt like it had been set on fire. The night filled with their impassioned cries. "Stellar Technology are the oppressors! Get them out of here! Protect our home! Kill the invaders!" The reinforcements, who had scattered like ants only minutes before, mustered up all their courage and charged at the enemy. Charles was fascinated by the fact that humans were so easily incited into action. He had read books about the countless tragedies that have been caused by this quirk of human nature. Even during modern times, such situations were still common. When the environment became dangerous, people's natural instinct to follow the strongest person present was amplified. Charles initially felt guilty about inciting them to fight to the death, but he knew that kindness didn't control soldiers. If he gave up every opportunity because of his own principles, he would make an ineffective leader. So he overcame his discomfort with seizing power and took the initiative to lead the charge himself. He encouraged the reinforcements who had been so unsure of themselves and of his leadership, and goaded them into action. He had reminded them all who the real enemy was, and he had silenced the doubters. He had ensured that they had all been adequately shamed for disobeying his order to remain at the gate, and then he had manipulated them into feeling as though they had something to prove to him. He had applied his usual trick of appealing to people's pride, and had assured them all that anyone who wasn't with them was against them. His ploy worked exactly as he had hoped. Many members of the reinforcement group were so affected by the emotions of battle that they shouted as they rushed towards Stellar Technologies' troops. Their actions spurred even more members to fight back in the face of adversity. A dragon-shaped light flashed, and a dozen or so reinforcements were swiftly cut down. The battlefield was quickly littered with bodies. "A level 5!" someone shouted. The dragon's presence announced the arrival of true dragon energy. It was the symbol of a level 5 paranormal. As it always did, the appearance of a level 5 paranormal caused a shiver among the troops. Many of them felt their morale drop for an instant, and their charging footsteps slowed down a little. Then a water dragon soared above them all from behind, and fought back against the caster of the light dragon. It whistled as it approached the level 5 paranormal, who was holding a spear. The level 5 didn't dodge the attack. Instead, he raised the spear and lunged it at the water dragon. Another dragon-shaped energy collided with the water dragon, but blue lightning engulfed the level 5 paranormal, turning the tables on him and many of the people around him, freezing them all in place. "What's this?" he cried. "Someone's ambushing us!" "It's the monster from last night," someone shouted. Although not many people had seen the lightning cadaver serpent in person the night before, they still recognized its methods. Blue lightning that was able to paralyze an opponent was one of its signature moves. What frightened them all even more was that the water current around their bodies from the water dragon hadn't disappeared. If it had been water from any typical water-type paranormal, it wouldn't have been much of a threat to them. But the water dragon had been made using Alice's water, and when it was combined with the lightning, it had an amplifying effect. The level 5 and the others were swiftly electrocuted, but when they tried to escape, they heard a blade being unsheathed. The black half-moon blade slashed through them all with ease, and none of them were able to withstand it. They quickly joined the bodies on the ground. When the reinforcements saw what Charles had done to the fearsome level 5, they were all stunned. "Wasn't that a level 5? Someone asked. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was," his friend said. "I thought level 5s were supposed to be super strong." "They are," his colleague said. "He wasn't weak, it's just that Charles is stronger." The ease with which Charles had dispatched the level 5 paranormal was inspiring to the reinforcement group. He had made the process look so easy. They gazed at their hero with a reverence bordering on fanaticism. Lust for power was common, and every one of them desired to have the level of power that Charles possessed. But Charles knew that the battle wasn't over yet. "Kill them," he told his troops. He knew they needed no further encouragement, and he raised an explosive flame amulet and blew up a nearby armored vehicle. Then, he put his Sword of Death to good use and began to sweep around the battlefield, cutting people down like stalks of wheat. He knew that the reinforcement group had been awed enough by his techniques to continue battling for him. And with him at the helm, the morale of the reinforcement team swelled to new heights, and they fought with renewed vigor. Zack and Alice were also level 5 paranormals. Although their strength paled in comparison to Charles's, they were still incredible fighters, and they managed to cause a great deal of damage to a significant portion of the Stellar Technology fighters. Alice easily pierced most of her enemies using her Frost Spear, and Zack's Fire Stake sailed almost lazily through the crowd, killing one enemy after another. Embarrassingly, against only 3 level 5 warriors and a paranormal with unsurpassed talent, the soldiers of Stellar Technology, who were used to launching surprise attacks and applying deceitful methods, were quickly torn apart. As soon as Stellar Technology's formation collapsed, the fight was effectively won. The Alliance reinforcements followed the paranormals around, picking off the weakened Stellar Technology fighters and finishing them off. Charles shuttled back and forth on the battlefield, appearing at one side and then the other. He hadn't been too optimistic the previous night, because he had thought that the reinforcement fighters were too weak. After all, they were a group of mostly regular people, so he hadn't expected them to be particularly useful on the battlefield. But although the reinforcements had started the fight in bad spirits, and without a coherent formation, Charles had to admit that they were strong after all, and their determination had come through in the end. Their lack of finesse wasn't an issue once the enemy's formation had been destroyed. The battlefield was in chaos. There were incidents where people didn't attack an enemy simply because they didn't realize they were on different sides at first. Fortunately, most of Stellar Technologies' people were easy to recognize because they were all armed with heavy weapons and wore tidy clothes. It was a bloody night, and Charles eventually lost track of how many people he had killed. "Retreat!" came the order from the Stellar Technology commander. "Stellar Technology forces, retreat!" The commander had seen that the situation couldn't be salvaged, and so he finally gave the order to withdraw. Originally, he'd been relying on a sneak attack. Once the company's spies inside the fortress had destroyed the energy node, he had planned to immediately ambush the fortress. The plan had been to scare a small group of people into surrendering, and then shake the morale of their entire army. They hadn't anticipated that the spies would instead launch an attack and send up the signal several minutes before the arranged time. Due to the time mismanagement, Charles had been able to refocus his troops and regain their confidence. It had turned the original ambush into a chaotic mess. The commander knew that if they continued fighting, they were likely to get more confused and end up being unable to differentiate friend from foe. So, Stellar Technology retreated. Once Charles had finished killing his enemies and saw that the others were in full retreat, he looked at his remaining crowd of supporters. They had killed fewer paranormals during the battle than they had the night before, but they had taken out more important targets. Stellar Technology's soldiers from the night before had been merely low-ranking guards, but the troops they had killed during this battle had been frontline soldiers, and so Charles was very pleased with the results. The Dawn Alliance's reinforcements erupted into cheers. "We won!" Despite everything, they knew that a victory was something to be happy about. When they saw the soldiers from Stellar Technology running away from the battlefield, the soldiers cheered excitedly and began to chant and sing. They knew that they had lost some of their people, but many of them were strangers to each other, and so they didn't feel the loss too badly. When Stellar Technology's soldiers had gone into retreat, Charles had started to gather as many of the fleeing soldiers as he could. He stood on a high platform and used the light amulet to illuminate himself. Once all eyes were focused on him, he addressed the assembled crowd. "The Stellar Technology spies among you have killed your friends who were responsible for guarding the energy node," he said. "Their actions have caused us heavy casualties. Yes, they've retreated, but the war between us isn't over yet. We need to continue fighting. I want to remind you all that when we're on the battlefield, we have to be prepared to die. If you can't accept that fact, you need to leave our ranks immediately. Go find somewhere to hide and live out these dark times as best you can." He knew he was being dramatic, but he wanted to hit the point home. They had lost many people, and it was due to their own lack of awareness. They had allowed spies into their ranks, and when they had gone to battle, many of them had discovered that war was far different from what they had imagined. Before the fight, some of the reinforcement group members had thought that it would be a great opportunity to contribute or to show off their talent. However, when they had been on the battlefield, they had realized that every enemy within their range of vision could take their life in a minute. Even a regular army would usually undergo strict training before they used guns. They had been inspired by Charles and his pep talk, and his words had ignited their passion for war. But now that their adrenaline had worn off, their hearts were once again filled with the dark clouds of doubt and uncertainty. Mark Garcia stepped forward. "There are no safe places in this world," he shouted to his comrades. "There are monsters everywhere. I heard that when bugs attacked the fortress last time, only a few people from the Dawn Alliance survived. Even if we wanted to run away, there isn't anywhere safe. The monsters are getting more powerful. If the next swarm of bugs are stronger than the last, what can any of us possibly do if we're out there by ourselves? If we go out there, not only do we have to fight monsters, but we also have to fight people. I've had enough of this damned world." His tirade resonated with many of the others, and they began to mutter and ponder what he had said. It was true that they lived in a terrifying and tragic era. Compared to the peace of the past, their existence in the new era felt like purgatory. He was right when he had said the monsters were getting stronger, and that even if the people were to leave, they had to not only worry about finding reasonable shelter, but also finding food. But even if they managed to do all that, They wouldn't only have to worry about monsters, bugs, starvation, and exposure. They would also have to fend off other people who might try to take their resources and shelter. Mark said to Charles, "I want to ask you a question. Are you willing to take us in or not? If so, give us a place to stay and eat, and we'll defend this place with our lives. I can promise you that I'm ready to die protecting my home and my freedom." A new voice spoke from the back of the group. "So, you'll die for a man who is happy to use you all as bait? Even if he doesn't use you all as cannon fodder, are you sure you're really on the same side as him?" "Who said that?" Mark shouted. The crowd separated to reveal who had spoken. A short man with a pointed face stood behind them all. Mark strode forward and grabbed the man's collar, but the man refused to back down. "Are you angry because you know I'm telling the truth?" the man asked. Charles knew exactly what would happen tonight. That's why he didn't want to open the barrier. He wanted us all to die out here with the Stellar Technology soldiers. Isn't that right, Charles? Tell them. Everyone looked back at Charles. Several of them looked unsure. "I knew there were spies among you," Charles admitted. His admission seemed to genuinely surprise the short man. "See?" he gloated. "I was right. He admitted it." Charles shrugged. "So what if I admit it?" he asked. "What are you expecting me to say? Should I have told you all in advance and started the fight sooner? Or maybe you should have told them yourself, since you seem to know so much about it. Did you get your knowledge directly from the source?" "You're a villain," the man spat, his face turning red. "Don't believe him. He's a despicable liar, and he'll sacrifice you all." "I'm curious," Charles said. "You're a spy from Stellar Technology, and it's the soldiers from Stellar Technology who are killing everyone. How exactly am I the villain in this scenario?" Charles fixed him with a steely gaze, and then he appealed to everyone else. "I want to know what you think I should have done when I realized that there were spies among you from the beginning. Don't you think it would have created an awkward relationship between the Dawn Alliance and your group?" Mark threw the smaller one to the ground, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then he said, "You bunch of bastards from Stellar Technology are worse than animals. What right do you have to call Charles a liar?" "Everything I did was for the Dawn Alliance," Charles said. "I'll be honest and open with you. It's my job to protect them, and I wasn't willing to put them at risk when I knew there were traitors among you. If I had the choice to sacrifice 1,000 people I didn't know, or one of my own, I'd choose the strangers every time. I'm sorry I kept you all here and put up the barrier, but I couldn't let spies harm my people." By that point, everyone trusted Charles. They understood that he was no saint, but he was a leader, and it was often the job of a leader to make hard decisions, even if their choice seemed callous. But he had stood by his own people, and the choice he had made was to protect them. The reinforcement group would follow a good leader over a moral one any day. The big man, Mark, put his foot on the other man's head and said, "Well, it seems we've learned two things from this little exercise. The first is that Charles is very protective of his own people. He isn't the kind of person who will sugarcoat things or be soft-hearted. The second is that when it comes to the battlefield, he'll be leading the charge." There was a murmur of assent among the crowd. They all began to seriously consider their options, and they wondered if it was actually a poor choice to focus on protecting themselves. They weren't part of the Alliance yet, so Charles wouldn't prioritize them. But if they joined him, he would treat them as one of his own. It would be a great advantage to them. Mark had also highlighted another advantage, and that was the fact that Charles wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The reputation of the Dawn Alliance had spread throughout the nearby areas, and many people in the reinforcement team had approached Charles simply to check it out. They were more interested than ever to join the Alliance. They wouldn't have risked their lives to get to the base for nothing. Their main concern wasn't that they would be considered outsiders to the original Alliance members, but that Charles might treat them as expendable and lead them out to die. But during the recent battle, he had stood front and center without hesitation. "Charles could have stayed out of the battle," Mark continued. "Nothing forced him to come out, but he fought with the rest of us. So I can't speak for the rest of you, but I trust him with my life." Mark was a straightforward kind of guy. He was good in battle, but he was also a discerning man, and generally mistrustful of people. He considered himself one of the more dominant personalities among the reinforcement group, and he thought that Charles was the best candidate for them to follow. Whether Charles was ruthless or vicious didn't matter much to Mark. The most important thing was that he would treat them as equals when it came time to fight. And fighting on the front line wasn't the action of a man who was ready to sacrifice them all. Mark seemed to have managed to convince the rest of the group, because many of them began to shout their approval. "That's right! Charles could have left us, but he came out and fought. No, he took the lead. That's right! I want to follow a guy who will stand at the front of the battle. Long live Charles!" Charles smiled. It looked as though the group had finally committed to his cause. But he knew that their loyalty was far from guaranteed. He wasn't naive enough to think that he would win them over with just one battle. He knew that his best chance was to remain level-headed while they were all confused and present himself as a figure of stability. He decided that their loyalty wasn't important for the time being. More importantly, they finally felt as though they had a light in their dark world, a lamp that would guide them forward. The first round of the battle had ended. Stellar Technologies' surprise attack had ended in failure, and the company had lost over 2,000 soldiers. The losses in the reinforcement group exceeded 7,000, but when they joined the Alliance, that wouldn't matter. Since they had suffered so many casualties during their first fight, Charles knew the group would be looked down upon by the Dawn Alliance. When they did join, they would inevitably be divided into different groups. But because the team hadn't been together long, they weren't bothered that they would be separated. They had gone there as individuals to find a leader, and now that they had achieved their goal, they were just happy to be accepted into the group. During the reorganization process, no one was foolish enough to fight for power or dominance. Even the most ambitious of them knew that it wasn't the time to reveal their plans, since they didn't want to be thought of as spies. Mark clearly wasn't a spy, but Charles was surprised to learn that he was a dependable warrior. What was more impressive was that he was a warrior who had only started cultivating during the new era. According to him, he had found the martial artist cultivation methods easy to understand, and he had progressed smoothly without ever encountering a bottleneck. He was only at the upper end of level 3, but after cultivating martial artists' methods, his strength increased. His talent was aided by his determination, and his progress was particularly noticeable when he obtained a good saber. It wasn't long before he was considered the best fighter among the bio-altered people. But Charles had to remind himself that natural talent was a tricky beast. Those who had it were obviously lucky, but it didn't necessarily mean they were destined to be great fighters. Mark would need to prove himself on the battlefield before Charles would consider investing in him fully. He did like to keep an eye on prodigies in case they turned out to be elite fighters, but he also knew that many talented people became easily convinced of their own abilities and subsequently ended up not working as hard. Once the reorganization was complete, Charles assessed his land and found that the Dawn Alliance's territory had shrunk by a third. He didn't plan to immediately reclaim it because he needed to be certain that he would win outright. If he did manage to kill all his enemies, it would mean he could take back the land without worry. But if he couldn't rid himself of them entirely, even if he won back the land, they would simply raise another army and challenge him for it. Stellar Technologies' paranormals had attacked the energy shields at the border of the Alliance for an entire night. They hadn't caused much damage, but they had managed to destroy some of the nodes and affect their energy consumption. The reason the destruction wasn't worse wasn't that they had lacked paranormals, but because they hadn't dared to attack with all their strength. Lena's arrows were a terrifying deterrent. In addition to having Charles's protection, she was able to kill a level 5 paranormal from a significant distance. The residual effects of the arrows' explosion alone could kill more than 10 level 4 paranormals. That kind of power was truly terrifying, so they hadn't dared to send out any high-level paranormals because they didn't want to risk losing good fighters. Their enemies' reluctance to attack meant the Dawn Alliance members were able to enjoy some free time. While they were doing so, Olivia made a special discovery. Although the people from Stellar Technology who attacked the energy shield were all level 3s, there are more than 2,000 of them, she said. It's a scary number, but I only needed 150 of our paranormals to make up for the loss of energy they caused. She thought the unequal consumption was unusual based on what she knew of the energy shield, but she didn't reveal her suspicions. The effect was the result of the 6-point formation Charles had created, which made their shield different from the regular one. Due to the way he had established the energy nodes, not only could they maintain the daily consumption of the shield without fear of being attacked, but it also often had some leftover energy. Olivia had never seen such a method before, but she decided it was Charles's secret, so she wasn't about to pry. After the night of battle, everyone involved slept in. The sun, too, seemed to have stayed in bed, since it was around 9 o'clock in the morning before the first rays hit the camp. Everyone accepted the unusual change. No one had time to worry about the sky, and the Dawn Alliance's enemies had become their most pressing concern. In the meeting room, Olivia read out the information that she and the military had received. "There are about 25,000 soldiers from Stellar Technology this time," she said. "They lost more than 2,000 during the battle last night, so now there are around 23,000 left. So they don't have the advantage of numbers. But although they might not have the numbers, Stellar Technology still technically had the advantage, because they had more than 2,000 level 3 paranormals. Even with the new recruits, the Dawn Alliance only had around 1,000 paranormals of their own. What was worse, the enemy was organized and played to their soldiers' advantages, while the Dawn Alliance's paranormals didn't cooperate with each other at all. There was also a substantial difference in weaponry between the two groups, so it wasn't ideal for them to fight head-on. "Why should we be afraid of them?" Mark asked casually. "We've way more people than them." None of his fellow troops answered him. Almost all of them hated fighting. When they were exposed to their enemies on the battlefield, a single mistake would likely cost them their lives. Why would they care whether the Alliance eventually won the battle if they wouldn't be alive to see it? Although the Alliance united everyone's strength during times of crisis, that didn't mean that people would allow Charles to order them to die. None of them were regular soldiers, so they all had a considerable fear of death. Charles answered Mark. "Of course we aren't afraid of them," he said. "But if the price of wiping out the enemy is losing a lot of our people, then winning won't mean anything. As the leader of the Dawn Alliance, of course, I'll try my best to reduce the number of casualties. I want us to win outright." "Do you have any battle plans?" Alex asked. "Of course," Charles replied, "but it'll take a while to implement them. Tina, explain to everyone what you learned from your interrogation last night." He gestured for Tina to take the floor and address all of the assembled members. Everyone looked at her with anticipation. They all knew that Charles had captured some of the enemy's spies after the battle and had handed them to Tina for questioning. If she had managed to make them talk, it could have potentially turned the situation around. Tina took a deep breath and said, "We already know that the paranormals from Stellar Technology are generally stronger than the ones in the outside world. Additionally, their proportion of people with special abilities is higher than the average. Their martial artists were initially weaker than ours at the beginning, but now their strength is far greater than anyone else." As she said it, even she felt slightly disheartened, but she had information that could change their prospects. It wasn't information that she had obtained from her interrogation, but something she had learned from Charles. He had given her permission to share it with them all. "We already know how powerful they are," Alex said. "That's how Stellar Technology managed to convince so many people to join their sick crusade." Taylor's eyes lit up. "Did you find out a secret?" he asked. "I didn't learn it from the interrogation, but from information we obtained previously," Tina replied. She retrieved some papers and put them on the table. "These are Stellar Technology's research papers that Charles stole from them during a battle. There are also some papers from the military. From these, we know that they're researching methods similar to genetic enhancement from the old era, but they lack a few key things." "Like what?" Olivia asked in surprise. Most people were familiar with the science behind genetic enhancement from the old era. It had been around for a significant amount of time and had been thoroughly researched. But it was also a notoriously private field, so progress was relatively slow. Even if someone said they had made a breakthrough, it was likely the changes would be implemented slowly. "We noticed that their research was already nearing completion," Tina said. "It previously lacked the high concentration of energy and materials required to properly strengthen the body. But the changes to the planet that have occurred since the apocalypse mean that the materials they were missing are now available." "What are they?" Olivia asked. Every eye was now fixed on Tina. All of them had the desire for strength, since it improved their chances of survival. All of the assembled members wanted to gain access to the formula. but most of them were doubtful that the captured spies would have disclosed it after only one round of interrogation. In actuality, Charles and his closest colleagues had obtained the method to strengthen their bodies sometime before, but they had lacked any supporting evidence to boost the credibility of the whole thing. Charles had been waiting for an opportunity to leak the information, claiming it had been revealed via interrogation would hopefully increase its credibility. Tina cleared her throat. "We did learn something of significance from the interrogation," she said. "Stellar Technology is hunting powerful mutated creatures and then sending large amounts of their blood, along with zombie spinal cords, to the laboratory. The people who are given superpowers by force seem to come from the same place." Everyone began to put the pieces together, just as Charles had hoped. He knew that if he told everyone of his suspicions, people would likely dismiss them as a conspiracy. If he and the others had said that the blood of mutated creatures and the spinal cords of zombies were the key to achieving increased power, people would likely have doubted him. But by allowing everyone to work through the evidence themselves, they would all inevitably come to the same crucial conclusion through the sheer power of speculation. Tina's gradual revelation didn't tell people outright, but it did lead them all to come to the same conclusion. The blood of the mutated creatures and the spinal cords of the zombies are the key. Since they all thought it was their own idea, everyone firmly believed it. Charles knew that he had used some small tricks to lead them to the answer, but he had a clear conscience because he knew the information he had given them was true. He had simply given them the formula for the genetic enhancement pill. It had been top secret, but Charles knew that during the next few years, it would become a common commodity. Even though it was an improved formula, it would still have a different effect on everyone. It would only marginally increase their success rate, but during such a precarious time, it was essential to have the opportunity to improve as much as possible. Charles couldn't have cared less about the success rate. If he could offer a method to increase people's strength, it would create a sensation. "So, is the research valid?" Miranda asked him. She didn't want to get excited prematurely, but she found it hard to disguise her true feelings. If they had access to such a method, it was possible for everyone to become stronger and no longer be subjected to provocation or torment. If it worked, they could reduce their casualties. Everyone looked at Charles with identical eager expressions. "It hasn't yet been properly tested," he said. "It's only been through its preliminary trials. Someone needs to test it." He withdrew a bottle from his pocket. It contained the serum found in the genetic enhancement pills. When everyone saw the blue elixir, they stared at it hungrily. But they were also wary because they knew it was untested. It was impossible for such a thing to come without risk. And since no one had confirmed its safety, everyone was hesitant to step forward and volunteer. Mark frowned. "So wait," he said. "Are you suggesting that we volunteer ourselves for human experiments? Because that sounds awfully familiar." Everyone noticed with growing discomfort that what Charles seemed to be implying was eerily similar to Stellar Technology's methods. But at the same time, they were all desperate to increase their strength. They were caught between a rock and a hard place. Everyone wanted to have it, but no one wanted to test it. They knew that the first ones to test it would be revered, but they weren't sure whether it was worth the risk. "I've actually done a similar experiment," Charles said. "Just once, and it was supervised by the people who've been with me the longest. It wasn't an easy process." Olivia and a few of the deputy chiefs' eyes fell on Elena. They all knew that Charles had found a way to turn ordinary people into paranormals, but the success rate was low, and it required a lot of pain. Elena had a high pain threshold, and just seeing the ordeal she had gone through had been enough to send a chill down their spines. Olivia spoke up. "In other words, this formula has already been tested somewhat. The biggest problem is the danger, right?" Charles nodded. "That's right." Elena looked at the small bottle with weary eyes. Although she had used her willpower to get her through her trial, she never wanted to endure that kind of pain again. Tina suddenly spoke up. "I want to give it a try." "We want to try it too," Hugh and Tommy said. "Think carefully before you volunteer," Charles warned. "Even I'm unsure about the safety. But once a few of you try it, we can gather the feedback and summaries of your experiences and then increase the success rate for those who tried in the future. It was evident that the first batch was the most dangerous, and because Tina, Hugh, and the other two were Charles's earliest followers, he wasn't eager to risk their lives. "I'm willing to try it because I want to become stronger," Tina insisted. "But there's another reason, and that's because it seems as though only people with stronger physical capabilities and better control of their soul energy can withstand it. At this concentration, it has to be tested by someone who can endure it. I know my strength hasn't peaked yet, but I think I can handle it." Kevin stood up. "I'm the strongest among the martial artists," he said. "I should be the one to test it." "No," Lena said anxiously. "You can't take the risk." But Kevin insisted. "If you want to ensure the best chance of success, I'm the best choice." Charles looked at his sister and sighed. Then he said to Kevin, "You're not a viable candidate." "Why?" Kevin demanded. "You're too strong," Charles replied simply. "You won't be an accurate representation of the effect because you're already so much more powerful than everyone else." Kevin's expression darkened, and he sat down. He wasn't foolish, and he understood that what Charles said was right. His physical fitness surpassed that of every martial artist from the old era. Although he could rely on his physical fitness to endure the pain, others wouldn't be able to. And in order to improve the formula, Charles needed accurate data. "There's another reason it can't be you," Charles told him. "Your main focus is studying martial arts techniques. If this stuff causes changes in your body, it'll also hinder your research. You're too important to take it." Kevin nodded. "I understand," he said. Although the total number of ancient martial artists in the country wasn't insignificant, they were hard to find. Kevin was almost irreplaceable to the Alliance, and if something happened to him, it would affect them all. His safety was paramount to the success of the group, and his job was to lead the others. Lena looked relieved when Kevin didn't protest further. Charles saw her give a small sigh of relief. "My physical fitness is above average," Tina said, "but my control of my soul energy is strong. I really think I'm the best candidate." Even if she had to take a huge risk, she decided she would approach it without fear. "If I'm not willing to take risks now," she thought, "they're only going to get harder later." Charles reluctantly agreed with her. "If the experiment is successful," he said, "I'll customize a set of top-quality weapons for you." Tina's eyes shone. "That'd be amazing," she said. Charles opened the bottle. "All right," he said. "Open your mouth." "I can do it myself," she said quickly. Her face flushed. She wasn't about to let him feed her like a child. Charles shook his head. "Don't you remember when Elena had this stuff? You might break the bottle. I don't want to waste any." Tina had witnessed Elena's trial with her own eyes, and she knew that drinking the serum might result in involuntary muscle spasms. Reluctantly, she swallowed her pride and opened her mouth. Charles gently poured the serum into her mouth as everyone watched with trepidation and excitement. The second Tina swallowed the serum, she grasped at her throat in pain. Her fingers left deep red marks on her skin. She tried her best to control herself and not reject the elixir, because she knew that strength was the root of everything. She reminded herself that if she didn't improve, she wouldn't be able to continue to follow Charles. If that happened, she would be a martial artist who hadn't even reached level 3. After several seconds, she let go of her throat. She fell to the ground with a grimace of pain and let out a groan. Black blood vessels began to rise beneath her skin. The terrified crowd got to their feet. The reason the crowd looked so worried when they saw the black blood vessels under Tina's skin was because it was indicative that a person was turning into a zombie. Could this strange serum turn people into zombies? Everyone wondered. Charles frowned. He took out a syringe filled with a different liquid and injected it into Tina's arm. The contents of the syringe had been developed based on the military's research. It was a zombie serum that turned people in the early stages of zombification back into ordinary people. Once the zombie serum was administered, Tina gradually returned to normal. Charles could feel her aura becoming stronger, and her breathing began to stabilize. But just as everyone heaved a sigh of relief, cracks suddenly appeared on her body. Her skin began to tear apart, and trickles of blood seeped out, dyeing her clothes red. Charles saw what was happening and quickly treated her using a body-stabilizing amulet. It managed to stop the bleeding, and Tina returned to normal once again. Several tense minutes passed, and then Tina weakly opened her eyes. "I'm okay," she said hoarsely. She had barely finished her sentence when a powerful energy burst from her body. It was strong enough that everyone could feel it, and they were delighted. Although what she had experienced had evidently been traumatic, the increase in her strength was obvious. It was clear to them that the serum had worked. "How do you feel now?" Charles asked her. Tina thought for a while, and then she said, "I didn't awaken like Elena, but I can feel that my level has increased. Not only did I break through the 3rd level, but I also increased by 5 steps." No one could believe it. They babbled excitedly. "Impossible! You weren't even at the peak of level 2 before. Just one shot of that stuff and you've improved that much? That's crazy! I can't believe how powerful that serum is. But if Stellar Technology also uses it..." They finally understood how Stellar Technology had increased their power levels almost to the extent of the Dawn Alliances. They had been baffled as to how such useless soldiers had improved their physical fitness in such a short space of time. Now they had their answer. The question on all their minds was that if Stellar Technology had mastered the same technique, how could the Alliance hope to beat them? Tina reached out her hand and took out a dagger. Then she gently folded her hand around it and broke the steel weapon in 2. Kevin's eyes lit up. "Did you use your soul energy to do that?" Tina shook her head. "Impossible!" everyone exclaimed. Using soul energy to break a steel dagger wasn't particularly impressive to most fighters, but achieving the same result by applying nothing but one's physical strength was inconceivable. It seemed that the genetic enhancement serum also had the ability to strengthen the body. Tina confirmed what they were all wondering. "I feel that like my physical strength has increased," she said, "but I'm also really hungry." "If this stuff really does strengthen the body," Kevin said, "then it's perfectly normal to feel hungry. You've used a lot of energy." "So what's the catch with this serum?" Olivia asked Charles quietly. Charles handed Tina a piece of cooked fish. "There you go," he said. The fish was a level 5 mutated salmon. It contained considerably more energy than ordinary meat, and it could replenish missing energy from a strengthening body. Tina devoured the fish hungrily, not caring that everyone was still watching her. Charles turned his attention back to the crowd. "Just one test isn't enough," he said. "We want to try too," Hugh and Tommy said excitedly. They were both good friends with Tina, but there was a friendly rivalry between the 3 of them. They all loved to compete against each other. If Tina was going to test the substance, they weren't about to be outdone. Charles didn't try to discourage them. Instead, he quietly gestured for them to join him, and then he gave them the serum just as he had done to Tina, starting with Hugh. Hugh's process was almost identical to Tina's, and he barely recovered when Charles administered the body-stabilizing amulet. Once he regained consciousness and got shakily to his feet, he had also achieved level 3. His rank was slightly below Tina's, but it was still an undeniable improvement. When Tommy drank the serum, the black blood vessels didn't appear on him the way they had on the others. Instead, he digested the serum well until the cracked skin appeared. At that point, Charles stepped in and saved him. When his body stabilized, he stretched out his fist and clenched it. White lightning appeared in his hand, which was the symbol of a paranormal's awakening. Everyone's eyes lit up. Even though most of the people present had already awakened, they understood the value of the serum. It was an elixir that could awaken ordinary people. If news of it spread, it would cause untold chaos. "I'm still a level 2, step 9, Tommy said. "But there's no information about superpowers in my mind. I don't even have a basic idea of how to use them." Charles wasn't surprised. "You're not an awakened paranormal," he explained, "so you won't have the same traits as one. You can use crystal cores to improve yourself." He faced the crowd again. "I want to make it clear what's happening here," he said. "According to our preliminary experiments, we can ascertain that this medicine is apparently overwhelmingly effective. Not only can it strengthen a person's body, but it can also increase their soul energy. But it does have a potential side effect. It can turn a person into a zombie. I do have a serum for that, but I think everyone here understands the pros and cons of using those. Zombie serums could save people who hadn't completely transformed into zombies, but it wasn't guaranteed. If a person was too deeply infected, they couldn't be saved. According to the military's intelligence, if a person was repeatedly infected, their body would become immune to the serum, and there was no known way to save them. I think that there's a way to correct that problem, Olivia said. I think it has something to do with the quantity the person drinks. The dosage needs to be strictly limited. If they drink too much, it increases the likelihood that the person will turn into a zombie. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. If such a serum existed and could be continuously used in order to strengthen without any side effects, it would be unfair to the awakened paranormals who had worked so hard. None of them thought it was unfair that those who took the formula would never awaken. If there was a limit on how much serum a person could take, it would be a useful tool to help them to expand their subordinates' minds without them becoming too powerful. But of course, the real problem isn't the quantity limits of the serum, Charles said. It's the fact that we don't know what sort of other effects there may be in the future. Charles was all too familiar with the side effects of the serum. In his previous life, during the later stages of the genetic era, enhancement agents had rarely been effective and were often useless. Most people eventually grew immune to the serums, and one of his roommates, Lenny, had died from the side effects of an enhancement drug. Charles knew it hadn't really been Lenny's fault. As the environment had worsened, it was a case of improve or die. Failing to progress meant death, and a lot of people had resorted to genetic enhancement agents as their last hope for survival. One of the biggest flaws of this stuff is that it uses zombie spinal cord and the blood of mutated creatures, he told Olivia and the others. They're both volatile substances, and they can easily backfire on the user. We can try and refine the mixture to include more palatable amounts of each, but there's still a big problem. The extent of the improvement is too great. People will become addicted and quickly take more than they can handle. Can we reduce the dosage? She asked. If martial artists absorb too much soul energy when they cultivate, it's easy for them to experience energy deviation, Charles said. It's a delicate process. If we reduce the infusion of soul energy in the serum too much, what's the difference between using it and our usual cultivation method? At the very least, it's controllable when cultivating normally. Everyone was apprehensive when they heard Charles's concerns. A martial artist's cultivation could be quick, but they were all aware that pushing their body's limits too far could have devastating results or even cause death. Everyone knew that the moment they felt as though something was wrong, it was best to stop immediately. The Dawn Alliance had Kevin to guide them, but even with such an expert on hand, more than 30 people had suffered from energy deviation within the past 10 days. Even Charles hadn't been able to save them. For people in the outside world, the risk was even higher. Alex smiled bitterly and said, "As usual, risk and profit are proportional. The more strength you covet, the more of a risk you have to take." Reducing the amount of serum would result in the drinker obtaining the same effect as regular cultivation, but if they increased the dose, there was a risk of death. It seemed to be an unsolvable situation. They needed a way to control their own soul energy. Everyone knew that Charles had a special ability to regulate his energy. He could almost see the question burning in everyone's minds, and he decided to address it directly. "I admit that my awakened ability does have a special way to calm my soul energy," he said, "but it's also a huge burden for me. Even if I cultivate for a whole day without sleep, I can only save 10 people. They all looked disappointed. It wasn't enough to only help 10 people awaken, and it would render the serum useless. It was known that natural paranormals had an advantage over genetically enhanced paranormals. Instead of taking a huge risk to improve martial artists' abilities, it was easier and safer to recruit more natural paranormals and improve their strength instead. Charles's time was also precious, and he hated to waste it. Using his time to help the people around him awaken wasted a lot of his energy, and he also selfishly thought that if he coached too many of them to increase their strength, he might struggle to maintain his authority. Charles's ultimate goal was to become the supreme ruler of the Dawn Alliance. He didn't want to waste time playing doctor. Although the two paths could overlap, he would always prioritize the former. "There are several issues with this serum," he explained. "Most of the ingredients aren't difficult to come by, but the core elements are the blood of mutated creatures and the spinal cords of mutated zombies. Everyone knows how difficult it is to obtain those two things. In other words, Taylor said, if we're going to produce this serum on a large scale, then we need to take the risk of going out into the wilderness to hunt. That's right, Charles said. In addition, there's something else that's a significant issue for us all. Stellar Technology has better skills, Olivia blurted out. Taylor visibly shivered. Stellar Technology has been studying the serum for a long time, Charles said. The quality of their formula will be better than ours. If they use this stuff as a bargaining chip to recruit soldiers, they'll almost definitely be inundated with volunteers. In the old era, there had always been people who committed crimes against humanity for money or power. Once society collapsed, there had been nothing to stop them. If the serum was developed on a mass scale, it would be a disaster. If Stellar Technology has already perfected the technique, Olivia said, they're not going to disclose it and use it to recruit people. They'd be worried about a coup. Charles shook his head. The extent of their control over this technique depends on the soldiers in the outside world, he said. They put a lot of effort into controlling the soldiers because, to them, if the soldiers aren't loyal, all their work will be meaningless. When everyone heard this, they felt a chill run down their spine. They wondered if Stellar Technology was really trying to control its soldiers. The military had spread rumors for a long time, but most of them hadn't thought they were true. If they're forced into a desperate situation, or if another drug appears on the market to compete with them, they might get desperate, Charles said. It was only because the owners of Stellar Technology knew they had full control of the drug that they hadn't been in a hurry. If they knew that the Alliance had it, they might be forced into action. It was also inevitable that they would want to compete. Either way, Stellar Technology would be difficult to deal with. When everyone considered the possibility, their hearts sank. Facing an enemy that was armed with advanced technology was an extremely unappealing thought. Their relationship with Stellar Technology was already irreconcilable, so there would be no possibility of compromise unless they were willing to become controlled puppets. Since none of them were the kind of people who were willing to live in the dark, their only choice was to fight to the death. What do you think we should do? Miranda asked Charles. Everyone in the meeting room looked at him expectantly. In the face of such a conundrum, they reflexively looked to him for a way to solve the problem. Charles had become the figurehead for hope. Charles looked around the crowd and said, if the news of this drug spreads from Stellar Technology, the consequences will be disastrous, and Stellar Technology will expand their influence. We only have one way to deal with this. Make it public ourselves. Miranda's mouth fell open. Announce it? She asked. Are you sure?